So what are the central bank goals and how could they conflict one another? Let's take a look. So in these videos, I try to make it as future-proof as possible. But in recent events, the stock market has declined in the United States due to possible tariff war going on under President Trump. And when this happened, there was an announcement afterwards from the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, that highlights well the difficulty with the central bank to deal with a situation like that. And in reality, to make this future-proof, it's the difficulty of the central bank to deal with any periods of what we call stagflation. Stagflation is covered in a separate video, which is stagnating economy with inflation. Why is it difficult to deal in those situations? Well, the central bank has one main mandate typically, which is to keep the price level within that acceptable range. So we want to have inflation rate at around 2% yearly, and a 1 to 3% range is acceptable, but we're aiming for 2%. And that's the main goal. But there's a second goal that central banks often strive towards, is to be as close as possible to potential output. And this normally works well when you have what we call demand shocks. Let's say there's a demand shock that leads us to go into a recession because people are spending less money. So then if the central bank stimulates the economy by dropping interest rates, well, then that's going to stimulate demand and it's going to bring us back to potential output, a good production level, and back to the same price levels as before the shock. So that's easy to fix. Same thing as if there's a positive demand shock, they're just going to contract monetary policy by increasing interest rates to bring us back. Those are easy to deal with. However, you might have a situation where you are in a stagflation situation where, if we look at it graphically, the AS curve shifted left, and you have a situation where you have higher prices and underperforming economy. So if your focus is on bringing inflation down, well, you would want to increase interest rates, which will drop demand, and then in that situation, it's going to drop back down the price levels to normal price levels of like a 2% target, but it's going to drive us into a deeper recession. On the other hand, if you decide in that period to stimulate growth to bring us back to potential output, well, you've just taken a small inflation problem and you've made it into a bigger inflation problem. What was interesting looking at his talk is that although the stock market had just lost about 10% of its value and a lot of businesses were not happy with this very uncertain environment, his main message was that it was just too early to tell what's the best path forward. What he kept on saying is that we have a good unemployment rate level. The numbers had just gotten in and there were about 4% unemployment. So we're very close to potential output. Yes, there's these businesses that are struggling. There's the Wall Street, but then there's the businesses that may push back on making investment decisions. So by lowering interest rates, you can help them out and make them want to spend more, which is a good thing. But at the same time, with these tariffs, there is that potential increase in price level. And if you stimulate the economy in that situation, you're going to make that problem even greater. So in his talk, what was interesting was saying like, well, we have these two goals. They can conflict one another when we're in that kind of supply shock territory, because in the demand shock territory, it's easy. Like through the pandemic or 2008, you have this negative demand shock, meet it with a positive demand shock, which is to lower interest rates to stimulate back demand. It's very easy because you not only have downward pressure on prices and downward pressure on production, so you're going to increase pressure on prices and production, and you're going to get back to the optimal level, the desired level. Well, what he was saying here in this context of stagflation, and many central bankers will say the same thing, is it's hard to manage because you have to then decide what's most important. in this situation? Which of the two is getting out of hand more? Do we have really high inflation problem and a small recession going on, like a small drop in output, so I'm going to focus on fixing the inflation problem? Or do we have a big recession and a small inflation problem and we want to fix output instead of fixing prices? So he said, we're just going to have to wait it out. We're going to have to see what happens and which of the two we're going to have to focus our attention on. So it's just interesting and good to see that stagflation is much harder to correct. And it's the kind of decision, the kind of process that a central bank has to go through is to determine which of the two to focus on if stagflation were to occur. Hope this helps you understand what's going on in the stagflation phase in the mind of a central banker. Talk to you soon. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.